All right. Well, we'll get started in just a minute. And we have a vibrant discussion about nettle dance happening in our chat session, so I know everything is good. Now, well, let's actually get started because it is the hour. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. I'm your host, MC, and Chief Cat Herder, Brian Alexander. And today we're going to be diving into the future of liberal education. I'm very glad to see everyone here. Let me just give you a few words just to get things started off. Let me introduce the technology and our sponsors. So, to begin, you should know that this is a project that stems out of the Future Trends in Technology and Education project. That's a monthly report that we've been doing for years, which takes a look at current trend lines in technology and education in order to better understand the future. If you haven't seen it, go to ftte.us, take a look at some of the sample reports, and sign up. We have almost 2,000 subscribers, and we'd be glad to see you there. Now, we can't do this work without the help of our very, very generous sponsors. To begin with, there's NiserNet in New York State, an academic networking group that does great work there. We're grateful to them for their support. They're also helping us is Shindig. As you can tell, Shindig does great things for us. They make this technology available that we're using right now, and they also have wonderful people who help make everything work behind the scenes. So we're really grateful for all of it. Now, speaking of Shindig, let me just take a minute to walk you through the technology so you can see where everything is. If you're new to this, or if you haven't been for a while, this will be a refresher. So right where I am and right where this slide is called the stage. And this is where the speakers are. Everybody in the audience can hear us and you guys can come up on stage. I'll explain that in a second. Below us is what I think of as the participant swarm. It's the audience, it's you guys. And you can tell by looking around who's there. You can see either a picture, outline, or a video feed of different people like Fred Graver or Kathleen or Bonnie or Susan or Beth DuPont. And every one of them is a person or a person at an office. Okay, I think I'm back now. So I was welcoming you to the technology just in time for me to reboot the technology. So as I was saying, we have the stage up here, we have the participant swarm down there, and you guys get to interact with everybody. So if you would like, during the conversation, you can click on a person, and say if Jason was to click on David, the two of them will get a little bubble where they can talk to each other in private. Now, there are four different ways that you can interact with us during this session. And I just want to walk you through them because they're all really nifty and they all have different ways of growing. So the first is, if you look down the very bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there's two orange dots. One has a raised hand, one has the word ask. If you click the raised hand, that tells us that you'd like to come up on stage. So if your mic is working, your camera is working, and you feel like talking, please click that and we can, without a problem, bring you up. So when the moment is right, and the pause, we can usually kick me off stage and bring you up and you can talk to our guest, which is terrific. Now, if your mic doesn't work, you're maybe in a public space, maybe you don't feel like talking out loud, but you still want to contribute. There are other ways you can do that. That orange ask button, if you click that, you can type in a comment or a question, and then we can flash that on the screen for everyone to see. I'll read it out loud and we can consider it. Now, if you would like all to go on Twitter, we have a lively Twitter conversation happening. The hashtag is FTTE, so you can just tag that and we'll be able to relay comments and questions from there. If that's not enough, if you'd like to chat informally with people who have come in with you, just mouse over your icon. You'll have the little I am chat box. Click that, and you'll get a chat that lets you say hello to the nearby roughly 18 people who have come in. Now, again, the theme of the Future Trends and Technology report is to look at the future of education. The tone of this forum is to do that as interactively and conversationally as possible. Now, speaking of conversation, let me introduce today's guest. We have Kristen Eshleman. Kristen is the Director of Digital Innovation at Davidson College, the other end of the United States from myself. She has been doing terrific work in the intersection of education, technology, and innovation for many years. She's been involved in projects like the Georgetown-led drive to try and turn educational technology to an academic discipline. I've also had the pleasure of seeing her facilitate unconference style groups and meetings at EDUCAUSE ELI and elsewhere. She's a deep thinker, a great practitioner, and a real delight to have her on the show. So please, um, Shanley, folks, if you can take down the slide and bring up Kristen, we can begin.
Chat meeting.
Greetings, Kristen.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good. It's very good to see you. I can see
Good
we
to see
have
you
a
too.
ITS whiteboard with maybe an org chart or plans right there.
Yes, that's our rollout of the new IT structure. We could talk about that a little bit too, if you'd
Oh,
like.
maybe we will. Maybe we will.
Okay.
But I have two vital questions to ask. The first is, what's the weather like there?
It's dropping right now. So it started out much warmer a few minutes ago, and at every hour it's getting a little bit colder. I think we're dropping into the 20s later today and into tomorrow. Right now it's 40s,
The 40s Fahrenheit or Celsius?
Fahrenheit.
Wow, that's cold for you guys. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
actually, it's pretty seasonal. That's kind of typical. It's been
Okay.
unusually warm. So
Well, I was thinking of you being in the sunny south. Now I'll have to maybe send you my sweater just to keep going.
yeah.
Well, the other question that's more germane is, can you tell us what it is that you do as Director of Innovation? What does that mean at a liberal arts college?
Yeah, so we're really trying to figure that out right now. But what I'm working on is really stemmed from a project I started on about a year and a half ago in launching an R&D space. So this came about after, I don't know, 2 or 3 years of frustration that I think others in the liberal arts space and really at any institution will probably recognize. And that's when you want to change quickly, you're stuck with these really slow budget cycles and these shared governance, decision-making processes, and you can't really move quickly. And we were facing a situation where I would have to make a budget request in October. I wouldn't find out until April whether or not that was approved, and then I would get the money in July. And by the time we implemented, a whole year has gone by, and that's a third of a tech life
Mm.
cycle. And so we're in a conversation with our president about something I can't recall at the moment, and I remember saying, "This is why we need R&D in higher education." And she just grabbed me and said, "Why don't you design something for that?" So I spent about 6 to 8 months working with Allison Salisbury, who's at EdSurge, to
Mhm.
design
Mhm.
something that would work for our institution. So I hesitate to say it's something that would work everywhere, but it's going to work really well for us. We've set up a structure that is not existing in its own center anywhere. It's basically a collaborative group consisting of myself, our director of digital studies, Mark Sample, our
Mm.
director for the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, which I can explain is a bit of a loophole for us and being able to do innovation in the full credit space, and then our director of entrepreneurship and innovation. And that group is really just a loosely affiliated group of people who are driving these projects that are bottom-up projects from students and faculty and staff on campus who would like to experiment with different models of education. And so that's really what this innovation space is right now.
Now, when you say it's a space, so it's you don't actually have a physical location. So it's a conceptual space and a social space.
Right, we don't. I think we may have one in the future, but right now it's a conceptual space and it's really just an idea space for people to come in and tinker. But it was really important for us that they be able to tinker in the for credit space so that our faculty and our students who we're trying to design this for, which is one of our big problems to answer at the liberal arts space, which is how do we prepare to teach for much more diverse backgrounds of students. We wanted to make sure they would have the time to be able to tinker in that space with us, that the ideas would be theirs, that all of this would be possible for them to be, fully participating in. And so that's why we do it in the full credit space, which is not without a lot of challenges, to say the least. But I'm glad we took that approach.
When you say it's in the full credit space, that means you get to have projects that are based on based in current classes.
Yeah, and that was kind of a social justice line in the sand for me, Brian. It was
Hmm.
really, if we didn't do that, if we kept it on the margins and it was a strictly co-curricular initiative, we'd end up designing only for the students that are the most successful because they're the ones that would participate. They're the
Mm.
ones that don't have to work or are not struggling in the curriculum. And so it would end up being these designs that are their interests and making our great students even greater, but that's not really the purpose of the innovations. So it was important, and we learned this from the MOOC experiment too. We're an edX institution. We had our faculty experiment in this space, which is really how we came to this model. That was the catalyst for doing innovation. But the
Good.
faculty who participated had to do it as an add-on, and it was a very difficult experience for them. It was hard for them, it was hard for us. So we really felt we needed to carve out that space in a way that was manageable for everybody.
And you did, and this is a bit of a transition here. Davidson participated in the MOOC project through EDX, but you didn't just work with the EDX headquarters. You also worked with several other liberal arts colleges and universities, right?
We did. So Wellesley was the first liberal arts institution to join. We joined after Wellesley, and the two of us were charter members of edX, so in the very early days. But we're liberal arts, so we're resource constrained. We decided it made sense to try and team up and figuring out, how could we across these two schools, and then later Hamilton and Colgate joined us. How could we across these four schools maybe collaborate on resources, collaborate on ideas, try and really leverage the strength of the network of liberal arts to do interesting work in the MOOC space. It's a challenge for schools like us who don't have dedicated graduate schools with graduate students who can work on these projects, that don't have schools of education where this would reside, and aren't ever really going to do online learning, I think, not fully anyway, not at this time. So
Hmm.
we felt it probably made more sense for us to do that. We also recognized pretty quickly that although we're charter members of edX, our voices don't carry the same weight as Harvard or MIT or some of the bigger institutions. So we thought we'd have strength in numbers and getting what we'd like to get out of a platform. So that's why we did that.
And again, what we're hoping to talk about today is your theme of strong together, networking liberal arts for digital age. It sounds like this MOOC experience with EDX with Wellesley, Hamilton, Colgate was a kind of trial run at that, where you were able to build on that network, a small network of four, but of four vital institutions. Can you say what you learned from that? What came out of that grouping?
So we never quite got it off the ground in the way we had hoped, and I think a lot of that is because we were coming into our contracts at different times, right? So
The EDX
Wellesley's
contract?
exactly, yeah. So we would each sign these 3-year contracts, but the contracts were slightly different between us. In some cases, we had the charter membership and full access to data. In other cases, those schools didn't have access to their data, and so doing that kind of collaborative research was a bit of a challenge for us. Some people were renewing their contracts at different times from others, and they had to figure out internally what worked for them and which direction they wanted to go, and the things they wanted to focus on. Colgate is focusing on reaching out to alumni. We were focused on interdisciplinarity and trying to put out courses that are unique to the liberal arts.
Oh,
Each school had a different focus. So it's harder, I think, when you're going in slightly different directions to figure out how you're going to do that as a group. And so I don't think we ever quite got to where we wanted to be. But and I'll take a moment here just to highlight someone who I think is doing really good work in this regard, and that's the Lake Hall group. And they are not edX schools by design. And Liz Evans is here. She's part of this group that we'll have the conversation with today. But that's 8, and now I think it started with 8, and now it's 9 liberal arts institutions that are um, working very closely with her. I think they've collaborated with funding to hire a dedicated researcher to start looking at digital learning in a very focused way. They have areas they're focusing on that are shared problems to solve across those institutions, and they are dedicating resources to collaborating on evidence-based design. And that, I think, is the right way to do it. And so I'm hoping she'll come up on stage and talk a little bit about that. But that, I think, is a really probably the best example of liberal arts collaboration in a way that I think is intentional and well designed. I mean, could we take a moment to talk
well,
with Liz?
we can, but she's the second in line. We have a question for you from
Oh,
Ted
great.
Newcomb. So Ted wants to know what tools, platforms you're using to collaborate on this project.
And that's on the edX platform collaboration, I assume. We're not. We've been meeting face to face, so we're not actually using any specific technologies for the collaboration. That group gets together infrequently face to face, and then I think once a week by phone at the leadership. So yeah, it's very low tech, I'm afraid.
Oh, good question and really useful answer. Um, well, since we're talking about collaboration and since you have sung the praises of Lake Hall, Liz, if you're ready, why don't we bring you up on stage?
Hey, Liz.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. Yeah, I was.
Oh, I'm seeing Kristen drop off for a second. Is it just me, or hopefully I'm not also frozen? All right. Um, well, I'm not sure if I'm only just talking to myself. I might. Oh, okay, I think I see Kristen coming back in, or maybe not. Well, here comes Brian.
Hi, Liz. I think we're having
Hi, Brian.
a technical glitch, and so we'll bring her right back as soon as we can get her back online. Um,
Great.
but Liz, let me say hello, and what a wonderful background you've got.
Yes, I'm very fortunate to be housed here in Haverford Special Collections area in the Quaker collection, actually. So I have a great backdrop of Quaker children's books. So it's fun to browse when I have a little bit of free time.
Oh, lovely. Oh, lovely. Okay, I think we have Kristen back. Let's see if we can get her
All
back on
right.
stage.
Hey, guys. Sorry about that. I got
There you are.
kicked
Yay.
off. So, how are you, Liz?
I'm good. Good.
Yeah. Do you mind talking a little bit about what you guys are working on and how you came to that collaboration?
Yeah, I would love to. And, thanks for all those kind remarks about the consortium. And of course, we, as a partnership of 9 institutions, we're exploring the space of online and blended learning for the liberal arts. We've really taken inspiration from what not only Davidson but your network has done with edX, and it's a model. I think our institutions weren't specifically interested in MOOCs, but very much interested in the same kinds of questions. And in fact, I think that some of the questions that you framed this session with, not only why should liberal arts colleges be engaged in the broader questions of higher education in general, but how can a network of liberal arts colleges that might be 9 institutions, but really this network of networks that we have, how can we be working together? What ways can we be becoming better at what we do, but also amplifying what we do and broadening it and being as effective as possible. So really glad for the chance to talk a little bit about what that means specifically for us. As a liberal arts consortium, of course, we are just promoting collaboration. I think in the sense that a lot of at this forum that we're in, and EDUCAUSE and all kinds of groups. The EduPlace group is a great example. A chance to share ideas, share resources, best practices, learn from each other. So we're engaged in that. But specifically also, Lake Hall is an effort to put into place a experimental framework to support the kind of project work that you're talking about. And I think there was a recognition that to some degree, in order for that to work, it does also need the ingredient of project management, and that's part of the role that I play within the consortium to provide the tools framework, the continuity, just some of the coordination that it takes. So I think in terms of, we're still also very much in the searching process that you described for your edX collaboration and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work and how to be successful. So I wanted to mention just a couple of projects that are ongoing for us that I think embody a little bit about what it takes to work across a network, because there's a lot of interesting experimentation happening in online and blended learning locally at all of our campuses, all of your campuses, but we're specifically looking for those opportunities where working across a digital network lets us sort of take it to another level, or work in ways that bring something additional to the equation. And I think we're seeing a couple different modes of that unfolding for us. And one example I'd want to cite is a project that we have that we're kind of affectionately call upper level math. It has a little bit longer of a title, but basically it's an experiment in collaborative course sharing. Came about due to the situation of all of our member campuses, of course, offer advanced mathematics topics as part of the curriculum, but being smaller schools, they can't all necessarily offer every course every year. And so this just brought up the conversation with a group of mathematics faculty for what would it take for us to actually share the courses across the network, open up an individual course that might be taught here at Haverford, make it feasible using online approaches for students at our partner institutions to be able to take that course, but take that course in a liberal arts kind of way. And what do we even mean by a course that's taken in a liberal arts sort of way? So this is a two-phase project. We're just entering in the first phase, which is kinds of proofs of concept and small experiments in, lecture capture, online problem-solving sessions, and all those kind of things. But that's an example for us where we have a multi-campus project team that's comprised of faculty and instructional technologists, instructional designers, all kind of organized around a central project that they're all contributing to. As collaboration always has its ups and downs, there are things that are great about that and things that are challenging. And actually, I think in this forum a few weeks ago, Amy Collier was on from Middlebury and made the great observation about the mode of working across institutions and collaboratively is becoming more common in business. It's becoming more common in what we do, but it's not automatic. It takes some practice and some development. So that's part of what we're experimenting with. Just briefly, the other mode of collaborative project endeavor that I wanted to mention as an example, we have 4 working groups, and one of them is focused on quantitative skills and supporting students for really across the curriculum, from starting students, but through to advanced topics as well. But especially focusing on the challenge that I think a lot of our campuses experience of students coming in interested in the quantitative disciplines, but varying degrees of preparation, or maybe having forgotten some things from their high school preparation, needing a little bit extra to come up to speed. So, lots of local approaches to that, quantitative skills centers and support and mentoring and tutoring. Some bring, students to campus over the summer and so forth, but increasingly interest in exploring online and blended approaches and platforms and tools that can support students. So several of our member campuses are really interested in this topic. They're working on it locally, but we've sparked up a collaboration around this. And in that mode, it is really to develop an experimental framework, not to say that all of the institutions participating will be contributing to the same experiment, but they all are planning to experiment locally in various ways. And the purpose of the collaboration is really to think about aligning those experiments so that whether it's content creation or curation or presenting and integrating things into the curriculum, and I think most importantly for assessing the effectiveness of these kind of approaches, if these experiments can be coordinated within a framework, it actually improves the chances of getting some meaningful information out of the experiments, because we, like many of us, have relatively small sample sizes. So any individual investigation only has, becomes a little bit more anecdotal. But if we can align our experiments across our network, we can sort of yield more. So I think those are the couple of modes that we're exploring as a somewhat small digital network, but would love to sort of hear within this group the kinds of things that are working and not working along these lines.
Yeah, so Liz, Josh Kim is on, and he has a question that he's posted. I don't know if you're able to see it, but he's wondering how the membership of Lake Hawes is defined.
Right, right. Well, I think as Kristen mentioned, it started out as a partnership of 8 campuses, and those conversations. Now, I wasn't part of the consortium at the time, so I wasn't in those conversations. But I think they did actually develop out of some of the MOOC conversation that was happening earlier on, and and trying to take that just in a slightly different direction, not to focus on MOOCs per se, and from those early days, or the original group that got together and formed that, one campus has left, a couple of campuses have come on based on that initial set of relationships. So right now we're sort of working within that realm of a small partnership of 9 schools and trying to get some of these things off the ground.
Yeah, and I really love this model, especially in terms of process and how to pull this off. Very focused. It's clear that each of these institutions has shared problems that they want to solve, and they've put the resources behind having someone like yourself to coordinate that effort, which we've found in our consortium is much harder to do when you don't have that in place. And so I promised I would throw a gauntlet out. And this is based on a conversation that Liz and also Hari Stephen Kumar, who's from Amherst, and he is also here, so I'm hoping he'll come up in just a few minutes. But we had this side conversation in email following a planning for the Lake Hall event last summer, where I just kind of threw out this question to the liberal arts. So we did the MOOC experiment, and we're doing this consortium with other liberal arts institutions. Lake Hall is also focusing on liberal arts institutions and the problems we need to solve. But arguably, we're good, right? We're good at what we do. We're good institutions. We're elite institutions. We're very high touch, focused on our students. We're really making our good students better. And there's this other problem out there in higher education that I feel like we're not engaging with. And this is what Hari and Liz and I talked about, and what I'd love for us to talk about in this session too. And that is, there are millions of people out there who want to have access to a good quality education, higher education. And there are places like Arizona State that are trying to figure this out. They're doing the Global Freshman Academy. They're experimenting in ways that I think in our space we tend to dismiss as not high quality teaching, not high quality learning, not the best student experience, but they're trying. And this is the question that I would have for the liberal arts. Why aren't we engaging in that conversation? Why aren't we participating in this bigger question of higher education and access beyond just helping our own students succeed and making our own campuses more diverse, which is great, but that bigger question of providing access to degree-bearing programs for millions of people who can't do it otherwise. And I just want to throw that out there to people who are in the liberal arts. This is really just a gauntlet to throw to say, should we be doing this? If we aren't going to do this, why is it a good idea not to participate? I'm really curious what people think about that bigger question and the ways in which really good designed networks like what Liz has put together at Lake Hall could do in addressing that much bigger social need that extends beyond the liberal arts. I'll throw it out to you, Liz, first, and then hopefully we can bring Hari on.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that rings up and down all through our programming and our conversations. And it's partly, I think it might actually connect to, I think it was the third question that you posed in the list of questions, kind of setting the stage for this of what works and what doesn't work. And I think for us, it's partly the trying to push into the space of online and blended learning where there's uncertainty, there's questions of, what is the role? And I think it's come up in other kinds of conversations. Maybe the liberal arts is a respite from the intensively networked online world, and, we want to slow things down, or we want to sort of be apart from that, or are we diving into it and trying to influence and make it better? But I think, so even figuring out how to raise that within our current campus cultures and working across networks is a little tricky. And I think it does also bring up the, we have the kind of top down, bottom up conversation quite a bit, and wanting for things to sort of fit organically with what faculty are interested in doing and motivated to do, and what the motivations are for coming from their institutions to move into some of these questions. So I think in your kind of throwing the gauntlet out there to that challenge, should we be focusing these efforts on making ourselves better, and then by making ourselves better, maybe amplify what we're doing, and that's our mode of influence? Or should we be focusing on swimming in that larger world more directly, and trying to infuse our liberal arts, what it is that we do best and what we want to bring toward, in terms of values and critical thinking, into the bigger conversation? I think, you know, it may be a bit of both and kind of nibbling on the edges, but I think if you're going to succeed in taking on that big challenge, you have to be very direct, as I think you're really leading this conversation in an important way, being direct in and transparent in saying, that's what we're talking about, and let's get serious about it.
Yeah, and I think there are some bigger pressing questions for these headwinds that are facing higher education and changing the way we approach teaching and learning. And I do think we have some interesting things to say about that, and maybe some potentially some blueprints and models that could be scalable beyond the liberal arts. And that's what I'm hoping we'll experiment toward. So, for example, this move toward outcomes-based assessment. This is something we've also talked about inside conversations. This is the first time I've seen on our campus the entire campus, from the president on down to administrative assistants, rally around the accreditation process in opposition to this whole outcomes-based model in a way that I've never seen us agree on anything. And it seems that we're increasingly doubling down on this idea that we really should be teaching only those things that we can measure. And in the liberal arts, we know we're teaching a lot of things that are very hard to assess. And we value those transformational experiences. And so I think that is a space where I would love to see us begin to tinker around assessment and evaluation and measuring those things that we value. And I know folks like Randy Bass at Georgetown, which is a much bigger institution, but is Jesuit and very much shares the same values as the liberal arts, are beginning to think about this question. So how can we be a part of that conversation? Part of the experimentation around assessing and measuring those things that are hard to measure. And these are principles of whole person formation, which are things like learning to learn, well-being, resilience, empathy, integration of knowledge, and all these things are the things we say we value and teach. And so I think there are spaces for us to do this, but I think the way you guys are doing it at Lake Hall, at least the model and the way you're building a network, reminds me a lot of the University Innovation Alliance and the way they're addressing problems that are different from our problems, but the process is a really compelling one. And so I'm hoping we'll start finding some of these bigger picture, beyond just the liberal arts and improving ourselves incrementally, and really go after that as a network. And I would love to bring Hari up, because I know he's joined us, and he's doing some really great work around assessing these things that are hard to measure. Could we bring Hari up? Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks.
Hey, Hari, how are you?
Good, Kristen. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. I don't know if you heard me touting the work that you're doing, but yeah, I
It's all
couldn't help but bring
slander.
up
It's
that
all
sign
slander.
conversation.
I deny everything.
So tell us what you think about these questions that we're posing.
It's a great question, and I really enjoyed the side conversation that started all this back over the summer. Um, I think one of the points that we were discussing over the summer was actually kind of challenging that premise that we are somehow good at what we do. In this world of kind of really Tony elite liberal arts colleges, where we really make a big deal out of our low student faculty ratio, out of the residential college experience, out of small student communities. But I'd kind of challenge that and ask, how do we know that we're actually good at teaching? Um, One of the interesting things has been to see that centers for teaching, have been pretty widespread in higher ed recently over the past, 20, 30 years or so, but have only recently begun to make an impact in the space of liberal arts colleges, where there's sometimes an assumption that we don't need centers of teaching at liberal arts colleges because we're all already good at teaching. Um, so, and then when we ask the tough questions at liberal arts colleges of, well, okay, how do you measure teaching? How are you getting a sense as to how good you are at teaching and how, what are your areas for improvement as teachers. There's an incredible amount of defensiveness that we encounter at liberal arts colleges. And to anybody who hears me say this and feels like wants to challenge me and say that you're actually good, I would ask you to take this question to your faculty senate or to your dean and say, how are we measuring teaching, and just see the hackles raise up. Um, Now, I think there are a couple of different ways to address that. I think one of the places that the liberal arts can have an impact on that is actually to push back on how higher ed in general has answered that question. I think the ways that higher ed overall thinks about teaching effectiveness is actually a really bad way of evaluating teaching. Um, and I think there's ways that we in the liberal arts can hold on to and say, here are some actual authentic ways of thinking about what makes for good teaching, and here's how we can go about measuring that without it being like a Likert scale, market-based model. The other aspect of that is once we begin teasing that out. Okay, so if we think we're good at teaching, who do we think we're good at teaching? What's the student population that we imagine, we are good at teaching? And then when you look at the changes that have happened in the liberal arts over the past 10 years or so, with an increasing amount of students that we call non-traditional, or we call new, or we use demographics as a way to signal that there's been a change in our student population. We see that some of the challenges that our students bring to us actually kind of strike at a lot of assumptions built into our institutions. In the liberal arts, we say we're elite because we have this kind of real veneer of with this framework of meritocracy. We assume that we're extending a liberal arts education equitably to a wider population, but we know that meritocracy is actually really a thin veneer over white supremacy, and we know that there's lots of different assumptions that go into how we see our students. And when all the research on implicit bias and inclusive pedagogy over the past 10 years or so have only now begun filtering into the world of the liberal arts, where it's begun to challenge our assumptions of, well, how do we think of our students as prepared or underprepared, and how does that actually affect stereotype threat on students that show up at liberal arts colleges from underprivileged backgrounds, first generation students, non-traditional students. They show up here and they experience stereotype threat, even in the context of professors that would otherwise say that they're very, very progressive, but they haven't examined our implicit biases. So those are two areas that I think we can really stand to challenge some of those presumptions that we have as liberal arts, that somehow we're good at teaching, and that somehow we're good at teaching anybody that shows up at our doors. I don't think we're really, I think we have a lot to grow in both of those areas. Um, Now, in terms of thinking about assessment, I think that is actually where, like you're saying, this outcomes-based assessment movement and the entrenchment that we have kind of against that, well, then what is our answer to that? What do we count as authentic student learning? And if we say transformational learning, how are we bringing in the research on transformational learning? And I think this is an exciting thing for me to see, uh, kind of a balance to the traditional Bloom's taxonomy approach, with emerging pedagogical research on things like threshold concepts, and things like signature pedagogies. And these are ways that are about whole person learning. And but we don't have to abandon the idea of assessment when it comes to whole person learning. And I think there are very innovative curricular, co-curricular bridges, very innovative ways of thinking about the residential learning experience as a way to assess. But again, that goes back to challenging a lot of faculty assumptions. For a lot of faculty, they feel like learning happens in the classroom. And any kind of learning that happens outside the classroom is sometimes they get defensive about that. So all to say, I don't really have good answers, but I do have good questions and challenges.
Yeah, but I think what's key for me, and that was incredible. Thank you. I mean, what's interesting to me is that we are asking these questions, I think, independently at these different liberal arts institutions, but collectively we're not necessarily experimenting toward that. And that's where I'm hoping, a network design where colleges who are thinking about these kinds of questions could come together. And what does that look like, and how is it led, and how do we start to embark on some of these experiments that head down this path? What's appealing to me is if we do figure out a good way to assess that, then we can start to design more learning that is in that threshold, liminal, transformational space beyond the liberal arts. And maybe it isn't just a residential experience. Maybe it is something that we can contribute to this bigger question of access and equity. And it hit me when I was at a radical middle meeting between venture capitalists and higher education leaders when I think it was Brian, I'm forgetting his last name, the president of a community college in California, um, made the comment that the Secretary of Education at the time had gone to Harvard and given a talk at commencement about those students, those graduates being the future leaders of America, and then came to his institution at commencement and gave a similar talk and referred to them as the future workforce of America. And so, it's just seeing just an elitist way of thinking about our student population. And that's where I'm kind of hoping, we can contribute to that work that people like Randy is doing at Georgetown and be able to help figure out what are these good assessment models that we could then create models and blueprints to send out to the rest of higher ed to say, hey, let's start designing learning with these principles at the core. And how do we do that? How do we assess for it? So anyway, yeah, it was just, I loved the conversation that we had back in the summer and your thoughts on that, Hari.
I have a couple of interesting projects that are on the horizon that, if you don't mind, we could talk a little bit about.
Please. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the projects is a professor in STEM here at Amherst, Sheila Jaswal, who is a professor of chemistry, um, started a course to respond to our student protests that we had at Amherst a year ago. And those student protests themselves were quite fascinating because these were our students challenging our assumptions on how good we think we are at teaching. And the students pointed out all the different shortcomings and all the different gaps that we're not addressing in educating our students. So Professor Jaswell put together this course called Being Human in STEM, and there were 9 students in this course. And what they did is they actually put together a website called beinghumaninSTEM.com. And the course was built around this idea of students actually doing research on the educational challenges at Amherst. And the students really were thorough. They broke up into groups and they explored just about everything from admission on into graduation. They looked at statistics, they looked at teaching patterns, they interviewed students, they surveyed faculty, and they put together their findings on this website with a lot of resources on, so what are inclusive teaching practices in STEM that would actually help with student outcomes and retention and persistence. That was so successful. They had like an event at the end of the semester where they opened it up to faculty and students, and it was like kind of like a fair. People walked around from exhibit to exhibit, learning a lot about this. Yale then picked up on this, and the Yale physics department invited the professor and her students down to Yale, and they've launched a similar course at Yale called Being Human in STEM as well. And so this semester, uh, Professor Jaswell and her students here have begun modularizing that course and have designed a sequence of 6 modules that can be given to other institutions, and other departments can take on these modules, or other courses can take on these modules. And each module has an online component as well. And so students can explore a certain question in each of these modules, and each module has a product that is that's a resource. It's a resource guide. So I could see that being something that can be spread across a network, and especially in the liberal arts, that actually kind of challenges, liberal arts institutions that take up these modules. And one of the things I love about this is that it's actually student powered, right? So it's students at these institutions who recognize these challenges, and then these modules are a resource for them to take those challenges, those pain points, and channel that into research that actually then helps the institutions learn more about that.
Yeah, that's
That's one
brilliant. I mean,
interesting
that
possibility
reminds
that's on the
me of,
horizon.
yeah, that's great. It reminds me of the work happening at University of Mary Washington around digital pedagogy and really critical digital pedagogy. So having students be more involved in the design of the learning, brilliant. I mean, we have the numbers to do that. We have the resources to do that. We should be doing more of it. That's fantastic. Hari, there's a question for you. Are you able to see it on the screen?
Yes, sorry, so we should have mentioned this earlier. Amherst is part of the Lake Hall network, and that's how this conversation got started. At the Lake Hall conference earlier this summer, Liz and I were talking about this, and Kristen joined that conversation. So does that answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, and I'm guessing we should probably turn this. We kind of hijacked your show there, Brian. But if you do, you want to join us back again and take over? Thanks, Hari.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
It's not hijacking at all. It's wonderful. I love seeing how people in the Future Transform community basically um, own the stage, own the conversation. That's fantastic. Um, I mean, if I wanted to, I could just put my feet up and relax. But this is really, really great. Uh, Hari, I did have one question, which was, how do you connect what you see on campus at Amherst with the students seizing control of their learning through reflection and learning design? Does that get channeled through Lake Hall into conversations with other campuses? So if you want, we could bring you back up on stage, or you could type it in. Um, but that's something, to come back to your theme, Kristen, about leveraging the networks of liberal arts colleges for good. I wonder if that's one avenue that we should anticipate. Well, we'll see what Hari says. I'm also conscious of time. We had a bunch of topics that we wanted to cover, and we are about 13 minutes out of the ending. Um, and you have raised a whole series of great questions, Kristen. Um, one, I'd like to come back to that, to one of the first ones you asked, which was, why aren't liberal arts colleges participating in the global conversation about access? I'm curious, what do you hear from people at other colleges when you talk to people at Wellesley, Hamilton, when you talk to people through Lake Hall? What, are, what is the reason for this right now?
Um, I honestly don't know the answer to that, why we're not engaging at that level. It's I, I think it's just historical with liberal arts colleges to be more internally focused. I do think we see ourselves as very different and serving a different population of students. I think we have that sort of perfect insulation from a lot of these, right? When I think about Davidson, for example, we don't engage in a lot of these questions because we don't have a graduate program. We are strictly an undergraduate institution. I think a lot of our peers are similar. And so our students, a fair number of them go directly into graduate schools, and those schools, I think, are feeling those kinds of external pressures to change. But we're not. We're buffered. There's a buffer there between us and those change pressures that I think just makes it easy for us to not have to address them. We're successful at what we do. We've had a consistent population of students coming to our doors. We're not tuition dependent. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why it's sort of a perfect storm of isolation from these bigger questions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not throwing it out there as that's terrible and we shouldn't continue in that mode. I just, the activist in me just wants to see us participate in it because I think we have really good ideas that come out of the liberal arts. We're so, it's not totally unique, but we do spend a lot of time as teacher scholars, people who are doing very good research, but also teaching. And that's not always the case at every institution. So I think there's value in us having a strong voice in the future of education.
I agree. I agree. We've had some. It's one of the reasons I worked with liberal arts networks for a decade. We had some similar conversations earlier this year with on open education when we were discussing why don't faculty or institutions contribute more of their efforts towards open access to scholarly publication or open education resources. And for me, this is always a question with liberal arts colleges. If you're committed to social justice, this is a pretty quick and easy way, and some have done so, like Trinity University, for example. But hang on, let me step back. There's a question here from Josh Kim, who has a follow-up to our question of why liberal arts colleges are participating. He asks, are national ed tech organizations like EDUCAUSE participating in the big access cost challenges? Can liberal arts colleges push this? That's a good question. What do you think?
That's a great question. I think that's a great question. And I know Josh is, I would love to hear what Josh, I'm sure he has an opinion about this. So I don't think he would have just asked that question without having a pretty strong opinion. And I wonder if he'd be willing to talk about what he's thinking.
Josh, if you want to come up on stage, just let us know. Oh, he doesn't have a webcam. So
Okay.
um, well, when we have him on as a guest, that'll be something that we can talk about.
Yeah, and I think EDUCAUSE, my sense of EDUCAUSE is that they're focused a lot on the IT space. And that IT space tends to be predominantly, at least at the national conference, predominantly looking at those back-end administrative systems and infrastructures. And the teaching and learning side is kind of, really segmented off into the Eli community, which is kind of an offshoot of EDUCAUSE. So I'm not sure to what extent that Eli community has the pull within EDUCAUSE to push these bigger questions. The question that I would take on is this issue of digital redlining and what Chris Gilliard is looking at in Detroit around IT policies and the way at certain institutions not like ours, where those policies are really holding students back from being able to do deep research. And they feel to me like the kind of question that's more suitable to an EDUCAUSE community than these bigger questions of innovation, experimentation, and change. I just don't see it as embraced as deeply in the EDUCAUSE space. But Brian, you're a little more connected to EDUCAUSE in that sense.
Oh, I think you had a really good answer. I was going to offer a simpler answer, which is that a lot of people are either on the IT policy side or info security or administration, and for them, really, the job is about limiting access, not expanding it. And that's not liberal arts has a similar achievement where if you ask a school like Amherst or Davidson who you are, they'll often say, well, we are a selective liberal arts college. So we are exclusive. And our
Yep.
self-definition is based on exclusivity, not access. But before I answer it, we had another question here from Ms. Lisa Stevens. And it was a question for you and for Ms. Evans. So if we have time, we can bring Liz back on. But for right now, you get first crack at it, which is, can you describe how you approach faculty engagement in your efforts?
Sure, I'll take the first crack at that, and then we can bring Liz up on stage. In the R&D space, the way I'm approaching it is really to keep it very simple and not do it a technology first approach. So I've noticed in the past we've done a request for proposals with faculty around anything technology related. I get really low participation because a lot of faculty feel they don't know enough to even get started. And so to kind of eliminate that barrier to experimentation, we took a step back and just took tech completely out of the question and asked faculty a very simple question. So the question we asked them was, when you think about student learning and your teaching to date, what have you always wanted to do that you haven't been able to do and why? And then we just asked them to tell us a story. Like, what are your pain points in teaching, not about tech? And then from that story, then we're able to look at that and say, how can technology help us do whatever it is you want to do that we couldn't do without technology? Like the technology maybe can come to bear on that particular problem because there's without technology it wouldn't be possible. And those are the kinds of projects that we take on. But I think for them, it's key for them to see that this is a pain point that they've identified. It's something that they want to do that has nothing to do with tech necessarily. It's about that first and then tech second. And I've found that tends to engage them more deeply. I've also found that I've moved away from quantitative evaluations of effectiveness in teaching and learning more toward qualitative and learning. And that is because, I'll just share this one anecdote. With one class where we switched from sort of typical active learning, we did that kind of assessment where we looked at test scores and student performance, and our students are already high performers. So that needle's only going to move a little bit anyway, and that may be statistically significant, but it's not that compelling a case to put those numbers in front of faculty. And every time we've done that, the response has been, okay, I spent a lot of time, upwards of 60 to 80 hours or more redesigning my course for this very little move of the needle numerically. And I can turn around and from a focus group from that same set of data, tell one story of one minority student who decided to stay in a STEM major because you changed your teaching, and they're all in. So I've moved from the quantitative to the qualitative, and I've tried to take tech out of the call for proposals, and that's been my approach.
Well, that's a really, really powerful approach. It reminds me of the success of digital storytelling. When you say we're going to be talking about storytelling, not digital video, and people go, oh, okay, we can do that. That's,
Yep,
you know, that's
exactly.
it's a linguistic hack and a mental hack, but it's, I think, a very powerful reframing, which really gives you a chance to expand the conversation. And we had this actually as a question that came up uh, in the Twitter chat. Not a question so much as a reframing. Carrie Watkins said that she wanted to know, how do we bridge the gap between asking the questions and experimenting toward a solution for meeting needs of future students? And I think taking technology out of the initial conversation is a really powerful way for doing that.
Yeah, I think so too.
I really wanted to have Liz up to answer this question, but we're out of time. So Liz, you're just on notice. You will be a guest on Future Transform in 2017. So you have no choice in the matter. It has simply been decided. Um, we had other topics that we wanted to discuss, but I think what you have done wonderfully, Kristen, is you have identified the intersection between liberal education and social change in a way that's really, really powerful. And when conversations with Hari and with Liz, you've really drawn out some of the different ways this can intersect with other issues, from assessment to interinstitutional collaboration. Uh, I think this is really, really rich. It needs some kind of banner name to head this on. And what will we call this? Collaborative digital social justice and liberal arts, or something easier?
I love it. Something from the Horton Freer book. We'll have something from there.
Oh, so you're giving me
Digital
transition.
citizenship schools. Digital citizenship schools.
You have unwittingly given me a transition, that a bridge to getting you off the stage. This is a terrible move you've made. We are out of time, and I do need to wrap up. So let me say thank you so much for coming. You are an inspiration and rich with ideas and practice. It's so great to hear you. We're going to have to bring you on back next year so that we can continue this discussion.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. And anyone who's interested in this topic, I think people like Hari and Liz and others, we want to keep having this conversation. So please reach out and we'll figure out a way to get us going or something and continue.
Well, it's a great idea. If you decide on a formal location for it, let us know so we can share that information out.
Sounds great. Thank you, everyone.
Well, in the meantime, stay warm.
You too, Brian.
Well, we are out of time, so I have to just take a quick minute and point you to the next week and what we're working on. So you should know that next week our guest is Matt Raskoff. He's the Vice President of the Office of Technology-Based Learning and Innovation for the University of North Carolina System. Matt is a fountain of energy and ideas, and he's going to be starting to talk about this new website launched, which is a way of trying to organize a better relationship between faculty on these campuses and the providers of education apps. If you look at those links there, you'll see the site along with a really good article about it. I think this is the key into a great conversation about interinstitutional collaboration and innovation. Now, also, if that's not enough for you, we are continuing our book club online reading. We are working through Miles Horton and Paulo Freire's We Make the Road by Walking. The conversation has been taking off in leaps and bounds. So if you'd like to join me on Twitter, take a look at Horton Freire, there's the hashtag. If you'd like to check out my blog, where we have tons and tons of links to everything from literally 20 different blog posts from other people, my summaries of the reading so far, links to resources, lots of comments and discussion. I mean, this is a very, very rich book. If you haven't read it, it's a discussion between two great legendary educators, all about social justice, access to education, and how to democratize teaching and learning. It's a powerful, inspirational, provocative, and challenging book. I recommend joining our conversation. Now, if that's not enough, we have the FTTE report, which just published the December issue, so you can catch up with that. If you'd like to learn more about Shindig, go to shindig.com. In the meantime, keep reading, think hard about all these issues, and we'll see you next week. Thank you all for coming. Goodbye.